Hello and welcome. Today I am joined by Dr. Amit Pannu, who is Chief Medical Officer at Derby County. Amit, thank you for joining.
No problem. No problem, Andy.
So I'm especially grateful because I know that it's a busy time of the year. You've got transfer window is tomorrow. So talk me through your day today and tomorrow for that.
It's a difficult one, Andy, really. So I'm quite fortunate. We've done quite a fair bit of business early doors in a transfer window, but essentially the last 48 hours are always quite interesting. Tomorrow I'll probably be on tenterhooks at the club waiting to see if any further signings occur. So generally my day will just be doing my day-to-day work and then waiting to see if the manager or the recruitment team approach me and ask me about a signing.
So what is that dynamic then? So at what point do you find out that you need to do a medical or, what is a medical? How does that all work?
So, interesting one. It's changed over the years, actually, where medical have been involved a lot more, probably I'd say over the last 5 years in the recruitment process. So when they identify targets, they generally speak to myself or the head physio. We're fortunate to have John Hartley. And they'll ask our opinion. We'll do a little bit of research on the player, look at the injury history. We generally produce a report which goes to the board and the manager, and then they take those bits of information as well as all the other information that they obviously look at. So that's the initial process, and then we get a heads up that they may well be a transfer of the certain player, so we can prepare any scans or anything from the history that we found. Then we generally do a clinical examination and some special tests and any imaging that we need to do, and that's how the medical rolls from there.
Right. And how long does that process take then from because you say you may not be aware of a player they're looking at even now a day before. Is that accurate?
Generally at Derby, I'm quite fortunate because we've got good relationships with the manager, the CEO and the recruitment team. So they do generally give us a heads up prior to things. What you find is as the window's shutting, things change and evolve and develop. So it's out of our hands. So yeah, over this period, you do get a few curveballs, but generally we do get information before, so we do know who we're looking at.
Yeah, no, it's interesting. And what do you think as well? Like these fly on the wall documentaries are massive at the moment. Like with, I think Newcastle's the most recent one. Do you watch those? And if so, like how accurate do you see that? Or is it like, is the cameras, do they play a part in how people are reacting from your perspective?
From the ones I've seen, I think they're pretty honest, really. I don't think anyone's acting any differently to the way they would do day to day. So essentially it gives you a good fly on the wall picture of what goes on. I can't say that I'd be really keen to have a camera following me around. I don't think anyone would want to see that, but yeah, each to their own, really.
Oh no, it's good because I was chatting with a mate about it the weekend, and I was like, yeah, I wonder how much it does affect certain people. But it's like, yeah, that's good. That's good if you think it is accurate, then that's helpful.
I think talking to people who've been involved in them, you generally forget that the camera's there. So essentially, after you get used to the camera for, I don't know, an hour or so, you forget it's there. So you just carry on as you normally would, because essentially you've still got a job to do, whether the camera's there or not. So that's generally what I see people when I've watched them.
Yeah. Oh no, good. So in terms of you then, what made you, like, where are you from and how did you want to get involved in like the medical world?
So I was born in Wales, which I get ribbed for. I don't know why. I generally always do. My father's a general practitioner down south. So I went to school in Kent and then university in Leeds, just following in his footsteps, really. Really grateful that they've always been supportive of me. So went into medicine at Leeds, and then when I qualified, kind of took the surgical route. So I started my basic surgical training, and then while I was involved in that, I was fortunate enough to be approached by James Brown, who's currently British Athletics at Loughborough, who I kind of thank countless times for getting me into sport. And he asked me if I'd help out at some rugby league matches. And then the rest is history, really. I just got involved from there, and it kind of snowballed. My career path changed while being involved in sport, because I couldn't really work in hospitals and be a team doctor. So I went down the general practice pathway after I finished my basic surgical training, and carried on working in rugby league for 11 years. I was at the club, actually.
Right.
Yeah, 11 years at a club in the Super League, and I started working, fortunately, for England towards the back end of that. So worked with England Rugby League as well.
Right. So in terms of, like, I'm still trying to pin James down to come and do one of these with me. Been asking him for about 3 years, but we'll get there eventually. So what was it in regards to James? What do you think he saw in you that made him ask you to do that?
I was working in accident emergency at the time, so I think that gives you a good grounding in sports injuries and the trauma that you face in rugby league. So he was actually working with a housemate of mine, and at the time he was quite interested in getting someone to help him cover games because he had other jobs going on. So that's how I first got involved, and it was a point of where we met. We actually got on, I think I'd like to say, from day dot, and he shadowed me and kind of taught me through the nuances of sports medicine, which isn't just medicine. A lot of communication with coaches, physios, multidisciplinary team, really, and players, obviously, which is can be difficult, can be really rewarding.
So what were your aspirations before James asked you? Were you looking to move into sport at that point?
Yeah, I've always loved sport, but never, unfortunately, been good enough to be a really high level. So having the opportunity to start working with athletes from quite an early age was really appealing to me.
Right. Yeah. And then, so when you were working there, was that full time in that doctor's role, or you were working GP as well?
No, yeah. So at that point, I was doing my basic surgical training and working part-time for the rugby club. Um, and rugby league's finances dictate that you probably don't have a full-time doctor. So essentially, I dovetailed sports medicine with initially basic surgical training and then general practice after that.
Right. And in terms of the surgical side, then, is that how far did you take that route?
So I completed my basic surgical training, but didn't move on any higher than that. I sort of transferred when I completed that. So I did 3 years of surgical training, and then I went into general practice after.
Right. And then in terms of the breakdown of your week, if you're working part time in rugby league, like how often were you there compared to your day job?
So yeah, sports medicine, medics, physios, whoever's involved in sport, it's actually probably a more on-call service if you're part-time. And actually, you'd probably end up speaking to the physio daily. You may be in and out of the club whenever required. Towards the end of my time in rugby league, I did have fixed clinics at the club, and I think they continue to do that now in rugby league and rugby union. So you're not there full time, but essentially, even though you're not there full time, it's probably a full-time job dealing with things, and you're always thinking about things and working things out, and then covering games at the weekends.
Mm. And what was the community like then in terms of like the medics involved in rugby football? Like, did they mix in, or was it how community wise was it?
Rugby league, excellent, and football's been excellent, really. Everyone's always willing to help. When we started in rugby league, it was more of, initially you felt you were pretty much isolated, but I was quite lucky because I had James as a mentor. But as sports medicine evolved, it was generally you meet the doctors quite frequently when you play, and also they introduced the pre-hospital care courses, so you generally met them outside of sport as well. And then at games, everyone's willing to help, and I think the sporting community, you don't really when you're there, you may feel isolated, but you actually never are, because the opposition are always there to help, really. And I pride myself on the fact that I'd always help anyone else. So it's more of a team approach, I think, even when you're playing someone else.
And do you find like much competition? Like I know that there's so much demand to be involved in sport. Is there ever like a competitive element of going for the same job or?
I think it's only natural that, yeah, there will be an element of that. It's a difficult one. You never know who's going for the jobs, really. I've been lucky enough to get the jobs that I've been involved in. And I wouldn't be able to tell you the other candidates, to be honest, because it's quite secretive, if you like. You don't even see them when you go for interviews. I don't remember seeing people at Blackburn or Derby when I was there.
Mm. And then, so what was your experience like at Huddersfield then? I mean, I've met some rugby league players when we had
Yeah,
our clinic, and there were definitely some interesting characters there. Like
yeah.
they made me feel very much not like a real man, that's for sure.
So, certainly it's true. I mean, bottom line, they're all young blokes, essentially, who really enjoy a sport, probably don't get financially rewarded as they could or should do, but really love the sport. And as a consequence, they just keep going irrespective. So you're there to support them and help them through injuries, but quite a lot of the time you're also there to try and hold them back a little bit, because actually they just carry on playing and training irrespective. They really don't have much respect for their body. They will just crack on, if you like. So yeah, interesting stories with multiple players that just keep going.
Yeah, you got any examples of those ones then?
Oh, in rugby league, I had a centre who was playing in a match, and I was watching him throughout the game, and he kept sort of waggling his hand, and he'd just come back from a long-term injury, and at half time he came into the dressing room, and I went over to speak to him, and he basically shooed me off. He was just like, "Get lost. I'm concentrating. I'm in the moment," type thing. So I left him alone. The game finished, and he came up to me and went, "Oh, Doc, I didn't want to say anything, but the bone in my hand's coming out of my skin." And he'd snapped his metacarpal, but he'd strapped it up himself. He called a physio over, got some tape, strapped it up himself, and just carried on. Which, I don't know, not many people will be able to do, really. I'm not saying it's the right thing to do either, but he completed the match. But there's multiple stories where people have just carried on from injuries that you'd think, I'm not sure that's right.
So how do you react when you're presented with something like that? Because it's kind of your responsibility, I guess, is it?
Yeah, it is, and I think from a point of view, they understand that as well. So, save for this certain case, he didn't really want to tell me because he was fearful that I'd be saying to the coach, "No, he shouldn't be playing," which I would. And we can only advise to a degree. And at the end of the day, it's their decision finally. As long as they know the risks, it is their decision. But certainly in that case, I'd be going to the coach saying, "I'm not sure he should be carrying on."
There seems to be there's like a lot more scrutiny, and certainly in football at the moment, certainly around concussion, and that's really in the press. Do you think from a rugby league, because it's not quite as high profile, do things like that? Do you think that sort of stuff does still go on?
I think from a rugby background, scrutiny on concussion occurred probably a bit earlier than it has done in football, mainly due to the high impact injuries. There's been a lot of work from a lot more intelligent people than me into concussion, and they've always been very, very vigilant regarding it. Initially, when I started, probably if you look back now and reflect, there were some occasions where players could have come off, but they very much strategically put themselves in a place where concussion was dealt with very well quite early, if you look at sports medicine as a whole. And I think rugby union's similar as well, to be fair. With football, because the collisions aren't generally as high velocity, I think it's probably taken a little bit more time for things to be in the press. And that's kind of driven it. But I think a lot of clinicians would have been quite vigilant prior to that. It's so difficult, Andy, watching a game without sort of any other eyes helping you. Say you're in League One, League Two, even in the Champ, you don't necessarily see an impact. And if no one else has seen it and the player jumps up and acts and behaves normally, then they historically continue. And maybe at half time say, I took an impact to my head. But that's the real challenging thing behind it. But I think what's the good thing that's been brought to light now is there's a lot more observation from not just the medical team, but everyone looking out for these type of things and little signs that help. So I think now in all sport, it's probably come to the forefront, which is obviously better for player welfare.
Yeah, well, no, absolutely. So how long did you stay? You were there 11 years at Huddersfield, and then
at Huddersfield.
What happened there?
So I was at Huddersfield and working for England, and I was asked to interview for a post at Blackburn Rovers. So I went for that, and fortunately for me, I got that, which was more of a 3/4 time role, really, I'd say. So I was doing general practice and Blackburn Rovers at the time. I remember when I got it, I was quite close to the coach at the Giants. So I rang him up and I said, can I come and have a chat? And he said, yeah, just come round. So I went round, I took him 4-pack, went round to his house, sat down with him, gave him the beers first and said, I've been approached for this. And he was great. He just said, I don't know whether he wanted to get rid of me. I don't think he did. He just said, if you don't take this, I'm going to drive you there anyway. So yeah, I was quite fortunate. So at the end of that season, I moved into football.
Right. Who was interviewing you at Blackburn then?
Dave Fever interviewed me, and the manager Gary Bowyer. So it was, yeah.
What was Dave like to be into? I know Dave very well, and I know he's a very straight talking guy, very fair, but that's my experience. What was it like getting interviewed by Dave?
Yeah, it was good. He's obviously a proud Yorkshireman. I'm a proud adopted Yorkshireman, so we got on quite well. And I think he's straight talking and fair, and he comes across like that in the interview process, really. So when he rang me and offered me the job, I was ecstatic, really. It was quite daunting having a manager in the interview as well. But Gary was great. He asked me the last question he asked me was like, do you like music? What was the last band you went to see? So yeah, it was a type of question.
See, that's interesting. A really random story. I went with Dave Fever. We were in New York doing some training on something, and we went to watch the Foo Fighters, which is more Dave's choice than mine. I'm very uncool in terms of my music choice, but Dave, that was a memorable story with Dave. But what was your answer to what you'd been to see?
I'd seen Pharrell, so I came out with Pharrell, and then I had a few eyebrows because they looked at me like, what are you talking about? But yeah, so I'm not sure that was the only reason I got the job.
Yeah, that is quite a cool answer as well, really. Again, that's far better than anything mine would have been.
Dave still loves his rock music, by the way. You probably know.
No, he definitely does. I remember we were in that, and I went and thought, I'm not proud of this one particularly, but I just said, there's Madonna's greatest hits there, and he kind of just looked at me as if to say, don't even think of buying that while you stood with me. I didn't do. So was Duncan Robertson at Blackburn then?
Yes,
as well?
he was. So I replaced Duncan. I unfortunately didn't have a chance to work with him, but I replaced him.
Right, he's another great guy, another straight talking good guy. So what was the move like then? So you'd been working part-time in rugby and then you moved into football. Like were they in the championship then?
Yeah, they were. It felt seamless to me. It was great. It was a bit more travel, obviously, but they all made me very welcome. The lads were great. Manager was brilliant, and Dave was obviously my boss at the time. Dave was head of medical, so really supportive. I learned, I mean, through sports medicine, I think the doctors don't just learn from doctors learn from physios, sports science, performance and everything. So I think if you limit yourself just to your field, you probably won't develop as a practitioner so much. So advice for anyone looking at sports medicine is listen to the physios, listen to the sports science department, the performance department, and the manager and the coaches, because you develop all sorts of skills that you wouldn't think when you start you'd have any involvement later on.
Yeah, like what sort of things? Because again, normally you would kind of see from a hierarchical perspective, the doctor maybe more senior in a hospital setting, or I know there's different dynamics. But what is that dynamic like when you've got, say, a physio who's running the departments?
I think people are people, and I don't have any airs and graces personally. And I think if you go into a position where if you've got a boss, it doesn't matter who they are, you're going to learn from them. I think that's a good grounded approach to a position. And I think that's what I've done throughout my career, because I've learned loads from all sorts of different people. And I think in sport, you've got to be willing to do that. And you don't have any airs and graces, and you don't have any chips on your shoulders, because essentially you're all working for one thing, and that's the success of the team and the welfare of the players. So as long as you can communicate well between yourselves and don't hold back and sort of talk around corners with other people, I think if you're open and communicate well, it makes the team stronger. And I'd like to think where I work at present, we've got more of a flat structure where we can all actually put our 2 pence worth in, for management of players, or whether you think something's right or wrong. Ultimately, the people higher up in the hierarchy make the decisions, but I think it's good having an open forum and everyone in your team being able to contribute.
And so you've done the rugby and then you're into football. Did you see a lot of similarities? Like from people would may assume and who's not involved in it, that football would be way ahead. But from my involvement from a long time ago, people said that rugby was actually maybe more advanced in terms of that communication and the diversity of skill sets.
Yeah, I think the medical teams in rugby are probably quite a lot smaller than you get in football. In football, you get quite a lot more resource, which is a good thing. But what you find in the rugby environment is they're probably a little bit closer. And I think as time's gone by, football's probably moved a little way into that way. It's difficult when you compare the two sports, though, because in rugby, you're dealing with the first team and maybe a little bit the academy. But in football, the operation is massive. So your first team squad might be, I don't know, 30, 40 players in the end, all told. And then you've got the academy set up, and then you've got the 9s to 16s, and you've got so many people to look after. So obviously it's got more resource, but you'd think with the amount of players, the operation's that big, you actually do need quite a few people.
And then in terms of like for your role there, so did you stop doing your other work then? You said it was a 3/4 role at Blackburn.
Yeah. So at Derby, it was a full-time role. I still do a session of general practice, but it's essentially a full-time role. So that's leading management aspects as well as clinical aspects.
Right. And so at what point did you leave Blackburn?
So I left Blackburn 2017. I joined Derby. And so I got offered the job, I think it was April that year, and I had to speak to the manager. I think the manager just changed at Blackburn. So one of the first things I had to do was tell the manager, which is always a good conversation. But once again, really supportive. I remember he just said to me, "Is it good for your family?" And I was like, yeah, it is actually. It's closer. And he was like, "Right, no questions asked then. Do me one favour, can you stay to the end of the season?" I was like, "Yeah, of course." I've never left the club mid-season, so stay to the end of the season. did some transfers for them and then moved on.
Yeah, no, that is definitely really good to have that relationship with anyone with you working, but certainly that. And what made you want to do it then? Was it purely about the family reasons or the other professional reasons?
It was a full-time role, so that was a big tick for me. It was closer to home. Had a young, well, still youngish family, but young family. Throughout my career, my wife's been like the most supportive person in the world. I mean, I went to England. I went on tour with England in 2010. She was 32 weeks pregnant, and she was like shooing me out the door, going, "Great opportunity! You've got to go, got to go." So I think I probably owed her one by that point. Even though it's working in sport, we all know, and you all know, it has its trials because weekends are always impinged on, if you like. You get late night phone calls, transfer windows, etc. But I think because it was closer, it was a bit of a no-brainer, and it was full time. And the team, they had a bit more resource, Derby, when I went there, so we had a decent team. I was fortunate enough to work with some very good physios, but I have done throughout my career, actually, to be fair.
Right. Yeah. And who was at Derby physio wise then? Because John wasn't there then, was he?
No, John wasn't there. So we had Nigel Cox was head of department, and then we had Robin Sadler as head physio. And then we had a fair few other physios as well. George Polglass, who's gone to British Athletics. James Evans was a sports scientist there. Yeah, it was a good department and forward thinking, which you like, really.
Forward, yeah. So how would you describe forward thinking?
So, yeah, I mean, it's very easy to get a certain way of working and stick to it. So I could have gone into sports medicine. This is how I deal with a hamstring. This is how we're going to deal with a hamstring. That's it. And I think that's how sports medicine's developed. We all obviously like improving ourselves and learning. So we all learn as we go along in the job. And there are different ways of doing things, and papers are released all the time. But there's always equipment that comes out that you probably don't always look at, because sometimes you get people who hard sell you stuff, and sometimes you don't really get to look at stuff well. But when you have a good relationship with, I don't know, firms that come out and show you stuff, you start looking at things. And I think at Derby at that point, we're really open to all sorts of things. So we used a variety of different new types of equipment, and Nigel was really keen on trying to push boundaries a little bit, and Robin was as well. So I fitted quite nicely into that, because part and parcel of why I went into sports medicine was not just to assess people and say, oh, they're out for this long, is also to intervene. And quite a lot of my workload is injection therapy, ultrasound guided injection therapy, so PRP, Ostenil. So I enjoy doing those side of things, and the team that I joined were quite keen for that as well. I'm not saying Dave isn't. Dave was exactly the same way as well, but it was just a different way of doing it. And unfortunately, Dave had left Blackburn when I left, a year before I left Blackburn. He decided to hang his boots up for a short.
Yeah, no, it's good. Yeah, Dave is like the king of isokinetics as well, isn't he? So he's the foremost person in terms of that, probably in the world, for certainly in football. So when you're going into these interviews, are you asking these questions yourself? Are you trying to find out if they are a forward-thinking team?
Yeah, I think it's part and parcel, and I think it becomes quite easy to see from a department and who's in place, and you do your homework before you go into an interview. I haven't had to do too many, but you do your homework before. So you look at who the physios are and how the structure works and what the performance team's like, and even the manager and his philosophies around football and the club's philosophy about the way they play and the way they want to play. You can kind of pick little bits up, and then that plays a big part in being the right fit, really, because there's no real point going in somewhere where they just believe in scanning and leaving a player to rehab. no interventions, etc. I think that's by the by, that's gone now, but I prefer to be on the coalface doing things, really.
Yeah, yeah. No, I do think it's really interesting because we have the same thing internally with us. Like, do they align with your core values, your mission, and albeit for you, it's about getting people better and avoiding injury and all of that. But there's still a lot of different elements to it, as you've alluded to, in terms of that. So like you mentioned as well in terms of like the communication, you mentioned that a few times and that element of it. How does that look? Like how often do you meet up? What's the hierarchy chat with management, with the medical department, but then the coaching staff, with the manager, with the CEO?
At Derby, I'm really fortunate. We've got really good relationships with the CEO. He's been really supportive throughout my time at Derby. And that's not just financially, that's even when things go wrong, he sits down with us and we go through things. So day to day, and it's probably the same in most departments, we'll have a meeting in the morning and go through the whole squad and then go through the injured players. Feels like a squad at the minute. Injured players, and then we just get to work essentially, and then we'll touch base throughout the day. After we've had a meeting as a medical department and a performance department, we then go into the manager, and our manager currently and his staff are really open to having chats about things, and I think it's quite important just to say it how it is. Don't feel that, and this is probably another piece of advice. For the people I've worked with anyway, they prefer, if it's bad news, just give the bad news. Don't try and sugarcoat anything. Just tell them how it is. And that's the way I communicate, and I've always done. And I think, majority of the managers I've worked with prefer that stance. So we have a chat with the manager and the chat with the coaching staff. They tell us what training's going to be like. And at that point, current manager and his staff are great, because if we've got any concerns about players, they're more than happy for us to sort of modify them, and then it just the day rolls on into training, and then we assess people after training and they have treatment. Physios are very busy throughout the day, rehabbing, preparing players, and then picking up the pieces after, and I get to watch.
Yeah, sounds good. And then when you've got in there, you've had a few managers in your time there. Then, so what is that like when you've got people through? Like, Rooney's obviously a high profile one that you've had in there. But what is it like when people come and go, and like how sudden is it? I know it will vary from case to case.
Yeah, it's not great really. I think so. Rugby, I was in 11 years, and I had 3 managers in that 11 years. 4 if you count the international manager. In Blackburn, I was there for 3 and a bit years, and I think we had 4 managers. And at Derby, we've had a few over the last 6 years. And I think you develop relationships with people, and I think really important to develop relationship. But it does, when they leave, make you feel a bit. You probably mourn a bit, actually, to be honest, because generally the medical team has a good relationship with the manager. And you communicate with them daily. So when they leave, it can be a little bit upsetting. But I think we're all big boys now, and we all realise that the industry doesn't really give much slack to negative results. So if you're not getting the results, irrespective of what type of job you're doing off the field and on the training pitch, if you can't get the 3 points at the weekend, unfortunately, clubs have to make probably difficult decisions. Yeah, I think I was fortunate at Derby. My first manager, Gary Rowett, left. He had an opportunity to go to Stoke. Then we had lucky enough to have Frank Lampard, who left. He was lucky enough to get a job at Chelsea. We had Philip Cocu, and essentially he did really well, but then results went a bit funny in his second year. And then Wayne came in, who was a player, so it was quite an easy transition there. But once again, Philip had left, so it was a bit bittersweet, really, to be honest. And then, yeah, when Wayne's left, we've obviously got Paul Warning, who's great as well, with loads of energy. And it's different. It's different, and it's getting to know. It's developing relationships and trust, really, and then getting over the fact that someone that you've been communicating daily with and had a good relationship was left.
Mm. I mean, you've had some really high-profile managers there, like certainly those middle three, huge players, very, very successful players. And what is it like for those when you're with them? That essentially they're running or managing a big company, aren't they?
Yeah,
And it's the same as running anything there. Like, how do they position themselves in terms of selling the vision, the mission, getting everyone on board? Like, is that a clear thing that you can see with a philosophy from each of them, or how is that transmitted to the team?
yeah. I think I've been fortunate enough at all the sporting environments I've worked in that the manager has a distinct philosophy, and generally, as people, everyone does it, and it's part of their personality and part of how they want to be represented by the team and also by the staff. And it's when they come in, you can see a reflection of that, and they're all leaders, and they're all good leaders to be in sport at whatever level. So they're respected straight off, essentially, as soon as they walk in the door. And I think part and parcel of that is sport itself. Athletes always respect the leader, and the leader generally is the manager. Well, always is the manager. I think with the higher profile and ex-players, they might have a little bit, I don't know, of a head start that other managers earn by working through the ranks. So I'd say the high profile managers that we had were in their infancy of their managerial career, but they demanded respect because of what they'd done in the game. That's not to say that their philosophy and the way they delivered things was any different to any other manager that I've worked with, but they obviously had that recent playing record as well. But essentially, all the managers, they all demand respect for the position they've got, and they all have a certain philosophy and a way of working. And I think they all understand that the staff reflect them. So they involved staff. To be successful, I think you need to do that. And that way the staff can communicate the manager's philosophy as well.
And what would you say is a good leader then, from your perspective?
I think straight talking, good communicator, someone who's willing to take calculated risks as well. I think I harp on about communication, but being a leader and communicating well is a given for me. And I think the best managers I work with communicate fantastically with the players. There's nothing worse than having a changing room where players aren't sure of where they stand, or if they miss out, say, a weekend, there's no reason for it. And the managers I work with have been great communicating at that point, because those are the ones that the next week you're probably going to need, and they probably haven't played the week before. So you've got to, and I think players nowadays are quite open to being told if they're not playing, why they're not playing, and generally take it on the chin and use it as a motivator to work harder. So yeah, sorry. I was just going to say, so leadership wise, communicating, being open, there is that element of risk in sport, and being able to be brave enough, if you like, to make the difficult decisions, and brave enough to change things when you see things not working well.
Well, because I think football is, for me, just being a fan and watching it from the outside, is like they can get a bit of a bad rap. It's like they're all stupid. They're not, they're not intelligent. Whereas my experience from the ones I've met is like, wow, I would not want to cross. They're very challenging, and they ask me what I'm doing in there. What's your experience of that?
Yeah, so there's obviously people do get a whole cohort, say, of footballers get tarred with the same brush. And from an intellect point of view, it's really horrible. It's not a nice thing to hear, is it? Obviously, he plays football, he can't be. But from my experience and the lads I've worked with, they're all gifted and they're all intelligent in their own way, and they can all communicate. And if they couldn't communicate, they wouldn't be on the pitch, because that's a big thing. And they can all get their point across. And some might not be as articulate as others, but it doesn't mean that they're stupid, if you like. And they've got loads and loads going for them to get into a position like this. It's not just football, in rugby as well. You hear them say, oh, well, that's all he does. He just runs the ball up, blah, blah, blah. But I think intellect stroke sporting achievement, you can't really slate someone who's a professional at anything, really, to be fair.
Yeah, maybe there's some jealousy going on there as well.
Yeah, a little bit.
And then, so in terms of like working with rugby, so you're still involved with rugby as well as doing the football?
Yeah, so I was lucky enough to be approached by Leicester Tigers. So I do some work for Leicester Tigers, generally clinic based. Derby have kindly allowed me to do it because it kind of develops me again as a professional working in sport. So there's a whole gamut of different injuries that you get in rugby. And the idea is we have quite a close-knit department in the rugby, and we'll have quite a close-knit department in football, and at times we'll be able to bash heads together and think about difficult cases together and use each other's facilities. So yeah, it's quite a good partnership.
And how do you balance all this? I can imagine being at Derby is pretty much all consuming.
Yeah. I don't know. Don't ask my wife, because she thinks I run around like a headless chicken. I think I'm really fortunate, and I go back to working with people. I've got really good head physio at Derby, and Leicester's got a great medical team. So quite a lot of the stuff is triaged, and I deal with certain aspects of things, but I trust my team to get on with quite a lot of other stuff. So that's probably what's enabled me to be able to do both at the minute. So yeah, thankful to people I work with, really, and thankful to the clubs for allowing it to happen, because it's helped me, I'd say, develop different skills probably.
Yeah, and I guess is what we were saying before we started recording, is that yeah, it's stressful dealing with a number of different things, but it'd be, if you didn't have any opportunities at all, or you weren't in sport, that's not a good alternative.
No, and I think as medic, you don't always feel it, but like I said to you before, we're kind of privileged, really, to be working in sport. And it's like any other industry, really. There's highs and lows, but there is also that privilege of watching the athletes at the weekend and seeing how they get on. It's not always great watching them, because sometimes it doesn't go so well, but it's highs and lows. And essentially, watching the hard work that the physios and the medical team have done, getting people back on the pitch and that coming to fruition and then performing, I don't think you can get another feeling like that, especially if you're not, well, working in sport, essentially. But I mean, other businesses, obviously, and other walks of life, they're different challenges and different rewards. So I just feel quite privileged to work in sport, and thankfully, thanks to Derby and Leicester, really, at the minute.
And then you've mentioned a few of these things anyway. So in terms of like the non-clinical skills that you think are important to be successful in, whether it's medicine or within elite sport, what would you say they are?
Being yourself, being honest, trying to have standards, like the basic stuff, timekeeping, etc. We harp on about communication. Everyone harps on about communication, but yeah, developing a style of communication, and you've got to. It is a bit different from talking with players to talking to the manager and coaching staff to talking to the board, etc., and developing the ways you do that. I think you've got to embrace technology as well, which is forever changing, and be open to different types of treatment and treatment modalities, really.
Yeah, no, I think that's good advice. And then in terms of like your own, I know you're really busy with all that stuff. Like, do you do any of your own professional development that's non-clinical, like any books or podcasts, things you listen to or watch?
I'm pretty much, I read a lot, and from a point of view of literature, I probably read papers more than listen to papers. Never really, I listen to the odd podcast, but I never really. I probably should listen to more because I drive that much. But yeah, generally from my own development, it's more reading based, and also learning from others. That's a big thing, whoever they may be, and different sports medicine's massive. And like I said previously, you learn so much from coaches, performance department, your own department, anyone. So essentially, yeah, learning from others and reading more than anything else. But probably should be more into podcasts now.
There's so much you can be doing so many things. It's just like you could be on YouTube, Spotify, all of these things all the time.
You
It's
wouldn't
overwhelming. No, yeah, no, exactly. So then for you, what do you see the future for you then?
Future for me, I really enjoy myself at the minute from my job, my department, working at Leicester as well. So just more of the same really presently, and hopefully quite a lot more success on the pitch.
Yeah,
And
brilliant.
not many injuries. That'd be lovely.
Better throw that one in at the end. Yeah, no, that's wise. Yeah, no, well, that's a good way to finish. So, no, I've really enjoyed doing that. And I know you maybe have to get ready for some phone calls for the transfer window. So, thank you very much for your time. Thanks for sharing. There's been some really good insights into that. And I look forward to seeing you soon.
Thanks very much, Andy.
Cheers.
Cheers.